but it was slightly different. It was like mergers and acquisitions. I would look at like why some companies buy other companies, and why would they use cash or shares when they're buying those. So in whatever degree or like area you are, you have to do internships.
But honestly, like the work I did later, I was very lucky to get to work in big tech in the UK.
Do you think the computer science sector is growing, I think, with the emergence of AI, or do you think it's slowly becoming oversaturated?
I would like to highlight how we have like such a radical comparison in between different paths.
Because it was super early days, we would have some cases when pension funds would come and say like, hey, we want anti like weapons, no animal abuse, like etc. indices, and then we would show them the results of the performance of the stocks, and they would say, hey, you know what, actually let's add back the animal abuse. So
and you mentioned you worked with some of the Kazakhstan companies like Kaspi. Did any of your, I guess, not expertise, but the fact that you were from Kazakhstan, knowledge of the local market or anything, did it help you in work?
And what would you say about the difference in cultures of startups, like maybe comparing in Korea and Silicon Valley or in Kazakhstan? Hello everyone, my name is Aray and I'm a current Year 13 student in Haileybury, Almaty, and this is the podcast number 4 for our Haileybury Connect. Today we are welcoming our guests.
Hello, my name is Dinmukhamed or Dimash, and I graduated Haileybury Almaty in 2018.
Hey, my name is Noor. I've been at Haileybury since 2008, and from the first days.
We're having a little bit of snow troubles outside. That's why we are still waiting for our last guest and host, Aruzhan, to come later. So, shall we begin?
Sure.
All right. Let's start with you, Dimash. What year have you graduated in?
2018. That's 6 years ago.
That's quite a lot of time. Which universities have you considered when you were studying in our age?
So I think when I joined Haileybury, it was one of the first years when the focus was shifting from the UK to like more global towards the US. We had a specific person for the US. But before that, UK was the main focus. So UK was still on my list. I applied in the UK. That was top 5 universities. So basically everything. Cambridge and Oxford, you have to usually choose one. So I applied to Cambridge, and then the rest was just top 4. Whatever didn't ask for this math test, I don't remember the name of it. There's this one in ICL, they ask for it. Anyway, so this was 5 universities in the UK. There was King's, UCL, University of Edinburgh, and University of Manchester. I've applied to the US as well. There was this list of universities which are considered like the top universities by Haileybury, so I applied into most of them, especially the tech schools, so MIT, Caltech, but also the others like Stanford and Harvard. And also I've applied in a few places in the Far East, Hong Kong and South Korea, and I ended up going to KAIST in South Korea.
Okay, and what about you, Noor?
I think my story is slightly different. So I've been at Haileybury since kind of its opening, and then I've initially the plan was to have an IB there, and then the plans changed. School offered A-levels. It was really the first year they would offer it, so I didn't have those subjects I wanted. And then I started looking for some schools abroad, and weirdly my main focus was on their sport criteria, like their achievements. So I was doing a lot of swimming back then, started to get into a bit of weightlifting too. So the focus was to go to the environment where I would be both academically and physically or sport-wise challenged. And I picked the school, which was boys-only school in Bedford in the UK, and actually got the sports scholarship because I was in the swimming team. And the idea was that I can both study there and be kind of exposed to the whole like leadership of future sports in the UK, because some like the cricket captain was from our school, rugby captain was from our school, so it was pretty good environment.
And have you ever considered like applying US or other countries for the sports scholarships?
For high schools, I did, but I think, as Dimash mentioned, there was that kind of very narrow UK type of focus back then. So I thought about it, but it was much easier to apply UK.
I see. Can you compare the application process back then to like nowadays, like maybe the competitiveness or the generally the culture, the attitude, the awareness of students?
When I was applying for university, while I was there, and I guess that was pretty much the same focus. You do your, I think, cover letter or essay, and show your grades. That's it.
Okay. Well, how about you?
So you were asking about university application for the high school students. I don't think things have changed much since when I was applying, but honestly, I'm not too aware of what's going on now. I think the UK is probably pretty much the same. The US might be different because there's universities there. Each university picks their own application process. Well, of course, there's Common App and everything, but it's still very different. Whereas the UK, it's everything the same thing all the time. I know for sure that the standardized tests have changed a lot. Some of them are now computer-based, including IELTS and SAT. And I'm pretty sure that the essays will transform to something else soon with the rise of AI, because now it's super easy to write a good university application essay. But I'm not sure if it's changed already or not.
Yeah, I agree. And who went to your universities back in the day, and then can you tell something special about the university experience you had back then?
Do you want to start?
I can. Main focus for me, well, although I went for kind of sport focus, I still wanted always to do something to do like with economics or finance. So I loved finance. Starting with like movies and then going into theory, etc. So I wanted to study that, and there is no other place to study finance in the UK than in London itself. Just to be exposed to the industry.
And you graduated which university?
City University. So I did banking and finance course. And I guess the unique experience was that you could attend different events at different companies in Canary Wharf, City, and be kind of motivated by all those high skyscrapers, etc. Back then, that was real. I guess that's the unique part of that experience. Also, I think it's very important when you're picking university, and I have experienced it from both sides, because I did masters at Imperial, which was pretty challenging, because it was like 12 months of really just studying.
Did you do it right after the graduation?
Yeah. When I studied at bachelor's, one thing I noticed that banking and finance was fun course for me. It was a bit less technical than I expected, but I think that was perfect because I had time to apply for jobs and actually sort of think what I want. Whereas some of my peers who studied at slightly more technical degrees, I think they were busy studying rather than trying to discover what they want. And I think that's very important, because if you're not super genius, I think it's very important to pick a course, to leave yourself some time to figure out what you want to do. You don't want to spend 100% of your time just in the library.
Well, unless you're doing research.
Exactly, unless you were doing. But I guess by that time you already figured out what you want to do. So that would be the main kind of learning for me that I luckily got away with, not being hurt by the experience. So that's probably one key outcome from that.
Okay. And how was the experience in KAIST different to this?
Well, I guess mine was very different, because KAIST is, well, first of all, it's an American system school. So you pick your courses, you pick all of the classes, or what they call modules in the UK, but it's much more free. First year, you're still uncertain about your major, so you do lots of stuff. But also KAIST is very technical. It's research oriented, so many people there do research, and they are like Norse peers who sat in the library all the time.
Have you done research yourself?
I haven't, and that's quite rare in KAIST. The other thing is it's in Korea, and the education is in English. The courses are in English, and some of the instructors struggle with that. Some of them are better with that. So it was quite challenging, but also it was very unique. It's a science and tech school in Korea. It's a top one school, probably in science and tech. It was quite boring socially because Korean culture, they are a bit more reserved to themselves. They're a bit close to foreigners. Some of them have language barrier. And the school was like the ratio of male to female, boys to girls was like 4-1, but it felt like 7-1. It was like all boys all the time. So it was socially very interesting. But I guess the one thing I did was, unlike Noor's advice, I was actually studying all the time, even though I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. But the purpose, like I had a clear purpose for that, because as I said, you pick courses at your own pace in KAIST, and the scholarship is for 4 years. So if you, like I did, if you manage to take many courses up to the maximum per semester, you can effectively graduate in 3 years or maybe 3.5. So I finished most of my courses in 3 years, and I dedicated the last year to try some industry, to actually work somewhere while technically still studying. So I was like, the 3 first years were very dense, where I sort of knew what I was going to do, but was still studying all the time. And in the last year, I had some time to explore, try working somewhere. So I guess
what major did you do?
The major, for me, it was, well, in English it's called electrical engineering. In Korean it's called electrical and electronics engineering. And I think in KAIST in particular it's electronics rather than electrical. So it's not like power grid electrics, nothing of like large scale electrics type. It's more about semiconductors, because obviously Korea, they have Samsung, they do all the memory and stuff. But I did double major. My second major was computer science. So, and inside electronical engineering, I actually went towards computer science, so I can say it's mostly computer science, but like on paper it's double major, electrical and computer science.
Those two combine very well, I heard.
They do, yeah. It's like there are many jobs.
So you used your last year still having your residence there to apply to internships? Yeah.
It was actually part-time jobs, because internships, well, it's just paperwork. I was working part-time in 2 companies, actually in parallel. Then I chose one, stayed there for another 6 months. That was one of them was actually very interesting. It was founded by a guy from our university. He was actually younger than me, and it was very fun. Like, I'm 21 or something. I'm having a job interview, and the founder of the company is asking me if I finished all my courses in the electrical engineering, because he still had some to finish. That was fun.
Yeah, I see. And how did you apply for the jobs? Like, where did you find the platforms to send you offers through, or maybe just mates?
That's a good question. So basically, well, there is actually quite a large Kazakhstani community in KAIST, and we shared a lot of knowledge. As everywhere, yeah. And we had there were a couple platforms where you could apply for jobs. They're all in Korean, but I guess my Korean proficiency was enough to read and understand some of it, and then translate everything else in the translator. And it's sort of like Headhunter. I don't think it's like LinkedIn. It's more like Headhunter, where you actually see like job postings. So I applied there for pretty much everything I saw, and my application was mostly like, "Hello, I'm KAIST student and I'm a foreigner. How are you okay with me working in English? Are you okay with me still being a student?" And only a few replied, and I ended up going to 2.
Okay. And how did you apply to jobs first, Noor? Like you said, when you were doing masters, you saved up some time, especially for applications.
Yeah. I think I should give a background, like actually why, for example, I was dismotivated to study and to go to just find out how to get into finance, because in finance, what I started seeing is that a lot of the people in finance were from drama engineering. So I figured out that you don't need to know finance to get into finance. That's basically the main outcome, or like learning for me. And from that point, I thought, okay, you know what? I'll just complete my degree, get into finance. And my whole kind of second and third year was learning how to get into finance. It was more of that. which is a completely different strategy. I don't think there is like time to explain everything, but basically there is one strategy where you just know how to get into finance, and then the second one is when you don't know, so you just try everything. So I was in the latter.
Well, I know for sure that one of the strategies is just to get into a physics major. Finish that one, and then everybody.
You would still need to know like how to pass through the interviews. There's some curveballs. It's very tricky. Even when you start getting into assessment centers, it's a lot of psychology game, because it's like you get 4 people sitting in the room on the corners, and then you have 7 people doing a case study, and a lot of the time it would be who speaks up first in the team to show the leadership, but then you can't be too dominating. So it's a very fine line. It's like a lot of learning to do. You have to fail some of those. It's very rare that someone is naturally just a super fit. It's super rare. So you just learn through the mistakes, and in my case I had to do a lot of them. So I applied maybe around 200, 300 applications just to get into the internship. But those weren't like all high quality applications, right? I was more of a numbers kind of guy, just to get into just apply as many as I can. At least that was my strategy. Maybe that was wrong, but that's the way I had it. And I got a couple of internships and jobs when I finished my bachelor's. So one of the jobs was in a Canadian bank. One of those was at the Bank of England, and then there was 2 internships, one at consulting and then one at London Stock Exchange. So I was lucky to have a couple of options, and I started thinking and getting advice from people. And first off, I thought, okay, Canadian bank, like finance in Canada, what happens in Canada? So
you'd have to move to Canada, right?
No, I would be in London, but that what scared me is like, first, there's no Wall Street in Canada. There isn't like idea of finance in Canada. I was like, okay, let's just leave that idea. And then when I was walking past the Bank of England, I saw some of the riots about the salary, because it was like public sector work, and I thought, okay, you know what, that's a bad sign. Okay, scrap that. Consulting, it was the same company that there is one in Kazakhstan, so I thought I need something more unique than otherwise, what's the point? And London Stock Exchange was the one. And funnily enough, my first ever work experience in my life was at Kazakhstan Stock Exchange. So that was like
ironic.
Yeah, love at the first sight. And I thought, okay, you know what, I should definitely go there. And I really, really loved kind of that whole exchange idea. And I got into the exchange between my bachelor's and master's. And at that time, I didn't have an plan to do master's.
So it's like summertime.
Yeah, it was summer internship. But at summer internship, I was very, very lucky to kind of get to know CEO of the whole exchange group. And he recommended me later to masters. Mm-hmm. So what I was doing a research on behalf of London Stock Exchange at Imperial. So I was doing, to be more precise, basically I was using their data sets, which usually cost some money, and they would give it to me to do a research, which I did on like statistical arbitrage, like trading part. So yeah.
But that's a pretty tricky way of doing that.
I mean that was just a lucky way to get into a really good university.
Yeah, that's true. And also you get to do a research for actual company, which is also like a good company. So you like do both things at the same time.
Yeah, I did research before, like you call it dissertation at my bachelor's, but it was slightly different. It was like mergers and acquisitions. I would look at like why some companies buy other companies, and why would they use cash or shares when they're buying those. So I kind of seen that finance side from both ends, like from the investment banking and from the trading side.
All right, I see. And how long did you guys work in the first internships you got?
For me, so the 2 I mentioned, one I spent 2.5 months in, I think, about 3 months. The other one was almost a year, 9 months, I think. And in parallel with that, I was also working remotely in Beeline in Kazakhstan. And if somebody's watching, I mean, it's probably fine if they find out, but they thought I was working full-time with them while I was doing 2 other jobs and still being in university. But yeah, that was 3 months. So 3 and 6 months, or 8 months actually. Yeah.
Well, I guess as long as you do all the workload, right?
I did, yeah, it was fine. So I think it's fine, yeah.
My internship at London Stock Exchange was 3 months. But I think what got me to that internship is what I mentioned about like doing internships wherever, whenever you can. I think that's just the mentality that I usually try not to like advise, like give a personal advice, but I think doing internship is just pretty no-brainer. It won't hurt. Like wherever, even if you're in arts and in whatever degree or like area you are, you have to do internships. And I mean, summer is pretty much empty, right? So you can work. So I've been doing those a lot in Kazakhstan. So those brought me to that kind of the end internship that helped me a lot.
It's all about the hustle. But I guess you were too lucky, or maybe I was too unlucky to study during the COVID times. So internship scene was like dead.
Yeah.
I think COVID times played like a double game. For some, it was like a very good time. Like maybe delivery companies, they benefited a lot.
Yeah, that's true. But honestly, like the work I did later, I was very lucky to get to work in big tech in the UK. And if you think economically, the only reason for this was COVID. The only reason they hired me and a bunch, like another few thousand people, was because they had free money from COVID times.
All right. I would like to highlight how we have like such a radical comparison in between different paths. As far as I'm aware, you studied in a scholarship program.
Yeah.
Like a full scholarship. You paid money for the education. We studied in different countries, like in Asia and in Europe, and followed like quite different paths as well as the majors. And it's interesting to like see how different your lives were, but at the same time, like what kind of similarities do you have, like the internship stories?
It's indeed very interesting, and it's interesting that our lives kind of crossed even before we came here to this podcast. That's very interesting.
All right, and what was the reason for you to switch your internship to like something else? Like, when did it end, the Beeline work, for example?
Beeline work, to be honest, I just didn't like what I was doing. It was mostly bringing more revenue. Beeline is actually, if anybody's using Beeline, I was surprised when I came back to Kazakhstan. Mm-hmm. They actually send you marketing SMS like once a day or so, 4 or 5 times a week, which is a lot. And I was working in the department that was like optimizing this for the revenue, for the profit of Beeline, and I was like, I'm not doing the right thing for the people, so I just didn't enjoy it. So it was like 3 months. They have this, probation period in Kazakhstan. That's quite normal. And after 3 months, I said, sorry, I'm too busy with my uni. I just don't want to do it anymore. And then for the other two, I think the first one was just scheduled to be 3 months, and the other one, by the time I was leaving, I was graduating, and I knew that I will very likely get an offer from Amazon for a full-time job. So I just quit because it was just the right time.
How did you know you would get the offer?
Well, because I actually went through all the interview process, and I thought I did it quite well. And I think by the time I filed my sort of resignation, I had already had a verbal offer from the recruiter. So it was like more or less certain.
That's pretty cool. And why Amazon? Did you apply anywhere else?
I did. I don't think I applied to Facebook. I did apply to Google. I applied to Palantir. Palantir I actually got quite far away with the interviews. Palantir is actually quite known in the tech scene, but maybe other people don't know. It's a tech company that's not a big tech. It's more like startup, but they pay very well, and they do. Their engineers are very bright, and they do very interesting technical tasks. Still a software company. I applied to a few more, but I don't think there's anything interesting worth mentioning. Yeah, Amazon was just, I guess, luck. Amazon was the one that responded, that I went through the interview and passed.
And you work online?
No, I actually relocated to the UK after that.
Okay, and that was like post-COVID times, as you mentioned?
Yeah, that was 2022 when I graduated from bachelor's.
Are you still working there?
No. I quit to do the startup, Laminar, this year.
Okay. We'll come back to that later.
Yeah, we will.
What about you, Noor? When did your first internship end? After research, before masters, it ended, right? Okay.
Yeah.
What was the next internship you got in then?
None. So I did an internship, went to do masters at Imperial, and straight after I just got got back to London Stock Exchange to do full-time job. When someone says stock exchange, they usually think of a stock exchange. Maybe some people even think of a bell, people shouting on the floor, trading floor, etc. But in reality, the London Stock Exchange was something bigger. It was a huge holding, like a behemoth of multiple companies. And in fact, like when I was interviewing, one thing that helped me is I knew about the M&As a lot because I was doing research back then at bachelor, so it helped me a lot on the case studies.
Sorry, M&As is mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah. So that helped a lot, but I did full-time job and I was rotating through different teams, which was an amazing opportunity because I always looked at my kind of first 3 maybe years as a learning experience as another university, and I like first half a year of my full-time job I spent in like a market risk department, is where you calculate different models on how risks can affect the portfolio or any money holdings. And I would have like a team of 4 people. 3 of them would be PhDs in physics and math, and I would be the 4th one. So I'd be like super like least educated person, which is great because you could learn a lot from them. I did that. I enjoyed it, not to the point to do it all my life, so I moved to the next team. I moved to the team where we would construct different indices. It's like an index, I don't know if you heard FTSE Russell, S&P, etc. It's like a collection of different stocks and then one price is as an indication. So what we would do is we would create a customized indices that are sustainable for different pension funds in the UK. So it's like super early days of sustainability and ESG. Because it was super early days, we would have some cases when pension funds would come and say like, hey, we want anti like weapons, no animal abuse, like etc. indices, and then we would show them the results of the performance of that stocks, and they would say, hey, you know what, actually let's add back the animal abuse. So I like to your point, I knew I was doing something wrong. I didn't want to do that, so I moved to another team which was like capital markets, which is like the core of the exchanges, where you bring companies to IPO. That's where all the people shouting and like all those ringing bells. Spent quite a bit of time there, a couple of years, and we took Kaspi to IPO, we took Kazatomprom. I wasn't in the Kazakhstan team, there wasn't such, but because there wasn't such, they would usually kind of take the resource and try to ask for some help. But mostly some of the like non-Kazakh companies would bring was like Aston Martin, who would do IPO for them, some of the listings for Coca-Cola, etc.
Can we clarify what IPO is?
Sorry? So when company is private, it goes public to the exchange when everyone is like happy and ringing bell. That's an IPO. And I spent some time, and then one of my clients took me on board to my next journey. It was a US asset management fund. And then after London Stock Exchange, I left to that investment fund and stayed there until December.
December, like this December?
Yeah.
Nice.
So you quit that job now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you mentioned you worked with some of the Kazakhstan companies like Kaspi. Did any of your, I guess, not expertise, but the fact that you were from Kazakhstan, knowledge of the local market or anything, did it help you in work?
Not much. The only things we would help with, apart from the usual like capital market stuff, would be like a sanctions list. That would be one thing would help be helping or advising with, but yeah, generally it's very similar because they would treat it as any other company because the rules are pretty standardized. So yeah.
How many companies from Kazakhstan were there on the list?
Back then, Kazakhstan has a very tricky history with London Stock Exchange because some of the companies have listed and then delisted. It's a very love and hate relationship, I think, between Kazakhstan and Stock Exchange.
I just mean with like
not much. It would be like maybe definitely under 10.
All right, so it's like not that they would need to open the Kazakhstan department inside.
Yeah, they had a CIS department, and even that was like maybe one person, 1.5.
Are there any Kazakhstan companies on American Stock Exchange, like New York Stock Exchange? I'm not aware of any.
Not New York, but Nasdaq. Actually, Kaspi abandoned London Stock Exchange and went to the US now, and a couple of other fintechs are there.
Which year did this happen?
When they abandoned, it was post 2022. I think they listed either this year or last year.
Also, like political reasons.
Yeah. Well, not only probably like liquidity, etc.
Yeah.
All right, and what are you currently doing? What are you planning to do?
So, I've been, I guess my whole work in finance led me to understand a bit more about finance, and I realized that a lot of the things you do is purely shareholder value, which is fine. However, through my work in the investment fund, I started engaging with venture capital firms, so we would be doing different indices in partnership with them, especially like AI index. We wouldn't be like subject matter experts, so it would bring someone who knows slightly more. And through that, I just got to know a lot of VCs, and I realized that beyond shareholder value that they also have to bring, there is some impact where you can talk to founders and actually see them grow. Not some Apple out there that you buy shares from, and then there is slight increase in that, but then actual help you can do. So that's what I liked, and through that I started doing slightly more activity in that space. I started helping VCs raise some funding, and then
so you're helping like the smaller, just opening up startup companies.
And then I moved to the other side. First I was helping VCs to get some money, and then I went to the other side. I usually say brighter side, to help startups and like connect them with VCs. And through that, VC, venture capital firms, those it's investors for startups.
Okay.
And yeah, eventually kind of ended up just going even more narrow. Started building a community of people from Eurasia, which is Central Asia, Caucasus, and Eastern Europe, who are based in London and who are like in tech scene. Not necessarily who are already doing startups, but someone who potentially wants to do that. So anyone in tech and startups. And I guess that's where we first met with him. And yeah, probably you can pick it up from here.
Yeah, right. So I think our paths, I think I was just attending some of the events by Eurasian Startup Hub in London. And at that point, I was already working on Laminar and our startup, but it was pre-YC. So YC is Y Combinator, the accelerator for startups that we got into summer 2024. So before that, it was like a side project for us. We were still in our full-time jobs, and we were working on Laminar in the evenings, on the weekends. But at this stage already, I was trying to get myself involved into the startup scene, trying to see what's going on in the AI LLM space in London. So I'd attend many of the events to just chat with the people to see what's going on. And some of the events by Eurasian Startup Hub, Noor's Hub, were the ones where I think met Noor in person before this. But then once we got into YC, we are now in touch with Noor. We're sort of like in professional relationship to some extent. Yeah, this is how we've known each other. This is how we are in our destinies are like our lives have crossed. Yeah.
And let's now welcome the fourth guest of ours, Aruzhan, and the co-host. We were discussing about the pathways in the lives of Noor and Dimash. And currently we're talking about the Laminar AI and how it was built. And actually, let's go back to that stage. How did you come up with the idea of Laminar AI? Were you the only person who did that?
No, Laminar initially was idea of mine and Robert's. Robert is my friend from KAIST, from university. He was working. We tried many different things in university. We tried building many different prototypes, not really companies. But one of the things he was working on back then was, I think, I'm pretty sure it's now available in Google Photos and maybe in iPhone Gallery as well. But basically, sort of like search in your gallery, you would open up say all photos of my cat taken on this vacation or whatever. And the gallery would pull it up. So, and this was back when Clip, a model from OpenAI that embeds pictures and text together to do this search smartly, was just dropped. So he was just playing around with it. And we very quickly realized that when you work with large language models, like for example GPT in the core of ChatGPT, its observability is very important. That you need to know what happened in your program and what was the input, what was the output, because they are not deterministic. Like if you write some code and run it, you know what it will do for the input A. Like if you input X, it outputs Y, and you know that. For large language models, that was not the case, and we quickly realized that. And also, we didn't like basically restarting the entire application when you slightly change the prompt, because with large language models, programming is different. You actually ask them in natural language, right? You ask them in English, can you please do that for me? And so you always need to rephrase, you always need to reapproach how you work with this. And we realized that we need a quick way to build, to prototype. And this is how we started building something for ourselves, actually. And then it grew to Laminar AI. Initially, it was this platform. I'm not sure if anyone's aware, but basically there's this visual editor where you can pull blocks around and like play around visually with your program flow, which is much, much faster than actually writing code or writing prompts for large language models. And we realized that this was interesting and that we could share this with other people, that this was like somewhat useful, not just an idea to play with. And so that's where we decided to go, not really all in. Back then it was still like a side project, but take it much more seriously. And that's where we bought a domain and started actually trying to advertise it.
Hello everyone, my name is Aruzhan. I'm going to be the co-host today, and I'm a year 13 student at Haileybury Almaty.
Am I correct to say you had a way of communicating with large language models, which was just English, and it would be not as precise? So you decided to build this like code block model, which would allow you to like communicate more directly with the code.
It's slightly different. It's more about like when you talk in English that's not that precise, you need to experiment a lot and prototype a lot and change things very, very fast. And it's not very convenient to do that in code. And that's why we took the language part, the large language models part away and visualize it. But that was the initial idea. We sort of slightly changed it, and it's not the core of our product now. But yeah, this was like we visualized the language part of I guess language programming to make it easier. But the code is still there. You still write code and you still use that part like as a separate part of your tech stack.
And what is the main point of the Laminar AI now?
So now it's more of a general dev tool for companies that are based on AI. So say, for example, we have companies that do, for example, there is due diligence, like when you check companies before investing in them, or like banks also check companies they work with. Some of these processes are much easier to automate now, thanks to AI. But if they want to build something serious, if they want to build a serious application, they actually need some developer tools around it. And like I said, observability is the main part. So like you need to always know what was the input and what was the output. When things fail, especially like at scale, if things fail, you need to quickly locate what failed. So it's basically a dev tool. We start with we collect your inputs and outputs of your language models. We visualize them. We run some statistics. We let you quickly search them. But also there are some other, I guess, convenience tech around this, like evaluations. So you could run tests to see how well your application is performing against some goals that you predefine. Yeah, it's an all-around dev tool. We're now thinking of a few more things, but as I said, the idea constantly changes. It's slightly different. We're experimenting, but now observability, dev tool is the main focus.
When did you quit your job, the Amazon one?
So officially I quit it, I think, June this year. But I was not taking it seriously for the last couple of months, I'd say, because Laminar was already growing into something, and we worked very hard on applying to YC, because YC is the top accelerator in the world. So Amazon I was just continuing. Well, I did it decently, diligently, so it wasn't like anything really bad. So I quit it in June, yeah.
And since then, Laminar become your main focus, and still is?
Yes, because YC invests. They invest quite a lot. It's,
Do you have a contract with them?
So YC investment is interesting. They invest $500,000 so they take 7% guaranteed, and depending on how you raise the rest of your round, they take up to, I guess, 3-4 more percent. So about 10% is theirs for $500,000. And by 10%, I mean if our company ever goes public or is sold to another company, like merged with another company, YC gets some in cash or in stocks. Yeah, and so they invested, and this meant that we could already, I guess, start working fully on this and pay ourselves. So this is where I quit, and now Laminar is the only thing I'm doing.
How quickly is it expanding? Do you need any other workers?
For now, Laminar is very small. We pivoted, we changed our idea quite late, like I said, to the observability thing in the batch. So this was in September, I think. So it's about 4 months old. It's quite small, quite early. We're just 2 now. So yeah.
Now this is like a more general question. Do you think the computer science sector is growing, I think, with the emergence of AI, or do you think it's slowly becoming oversaturated?
This is a very good question. I probably agree with what people from Y Combinator said in one of their recent podcasts, which is that now companies, especially like younger startups, want to automate things, but programmers, engineers, I guess, who program, they will figure out how to automate some of the jobs, and they will still need to, I guess, program the AI to do what they need. So I think it's like, on one hand, obviously many of the jobs get automated, including programming. Like nowadays, day to day, I use AI a lot. It speeds me up a lot, but it also means that instead of hiring somebody to help me, like hiring interns, I could just ask ChatGPT to help me write some code. But on the other hand, it's still like companies that use AI and that are not necessarily startups or not necessarily technical companies, but they still use AI to automate some of their processes. They will now need programmers. They will now need people who actually program and write that AI. So I think it's probably changing, but I wouldn't say it's shrinking. It might actually be growing too.
And Nur, what about the same AI interference in the banking sphere, in the finance? How much do you use AI to automatize things?
Well, you should be using it much. Well, the company should be using it much more than they are. But the problem is that they're not very fluid and agile, just because of their size and some processes internally. But I guess to also address your question, I think where I sit and sort of what I would do is sort of manage the portfolios and invest and trade with some of the largest like investors in the world. And from my seat, what I would see is that a lot of risk appetite and the money flows generally would be going into tech. So like, and that's just one single skill that someone in investment should have, is like a feeling or taste for where the money is, and I think that's definitely where AI sits now. Hence I guess me naturally also moving into that space, apart from that idea of that you can be much closer to companies and be helpful there.
And in terms of university, how easy was it to find a job, like as soon as graduating, or maybe like when still being in the university?
So I think we talked about this with Noor in more detail, so I'll probably just respond for myself. So as I already quickly touched upon this, 2021-22 was post-COVID euphoria for the tech companies. They were hiring like crazy because they had a lot of free money from COVID. And that is why back then when I applied, there were many jobs and they hired aggressively. The thing was, well, I guess it was more about how much you actually try, how much you, if you apply yourself, not about if there are many jobs. It's clearly much harder now, but with, I guess what companies want more now is experienced people, and in order to get experience, you should do internships or some part-time jobs, and then as soon as you graduate, maybe if you're struggling to find a job in a top company, find something that works for you and get experience, get exposed, find events. Because surprisingly, I think I've learned this more in the startup scene, but I think it's everywhere in the professional fields. Networking and just talking to people randomly in the events or knowing some people from working with them works much, much better than the official applications, especially if it's not on the top companies, but there as well.
And what would you say about the difference in cultures of startups, like maybe comparing in Korea and Silicon Valley or in Kazakhstan?
I'm not too familiar with the culture of startups in Kazakhstan. In Silicon Valley, it's clearly much more, I guess, hustle in terms of, I guess, more socialization, talking to each other, working together. In Korea, it's more isolated, just like the general culture too. What's similar though is how they work very hard, because that's also common to the American culture and the Korean culture. They work very hard. And I think the other thing is also investments, because I'm not familiar with the VC scene in Korea. But as far as I know, much of the finance that goes into startups is actually from some government or quasi-government programs, whereas in the US, investments come from everywhere. And I guess Noor would know much more about where the money actually originates for the investments, because VCs are like these intermediate layer in between the money and the startups, because they collect money from somewhere and then they invest in startups. But it's still much more diverse in the US than in Korea.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, to comment on Kazakhstan startup culture, is probably the mixture of what you said. It's an isolated hustle. Probably, it's like it has both of those kind of East and West cultures. But yeah, in terms of probably it's usually chicken and egg. It's hard to identify what exactly drives the startup ecosystem or changes it, or perhaps sometimes stops it from growing, but probably from the investment side, just a huge number of investors, different risk appetite, the idea that the patience as well, and I think that the difference was that in the US it's slightly different economic system as well. Here we have much like hardware or like industrial economy where you have natural resources, etc., and it's investors still, even though they don't accept it, they still have that idea that they have to see and touch it, and it's probably not discussed during the investment kind of decisions, but they will still have it at the hindsight, and think of those things before investing in some sort of software companies.
And what would you say about the maybe London environment towards the startups?
I think it's also a different mix, because that's exactly what we're doing now, right? We're trying to capture a talent there, which is probably a separate conversation. We're not doing it because of the London ecosystem. We're doing it because there is a kind of an arbitrage, or like this opportunity where it just happens to be that there are a lot of Eurasian founders are ending up in London. It's not that London is better or worse from some other hubs, perhaps in some cases, but London and Europe generally has a very strict regulatory environment, and historically been restricted on some stuff. Like, for example, GDPR is basically the customer is protected a lot in Europe. So because of that, I think that's probably the root. But it opens up another conversation that does it mean that customer is not protected in the US, etc., etc. I mean, it's always tricky because, for example, in Kazakhstan you would have Caspian. You can just get your driving license updated the next day through the fintech app. That's great innovation, but is it safe? So it's like a lot of questions from both ends.
Yeah, of course.
And both of you guys studied outside of the US, and the US is typically regarded as a place where you can easily switch your major. So going into uni, were you sure about your major, or did you have any doubts?
I never had doubt with my major. I think probably I was lucky not to have doubt. I was just lucky to be stubborn with kind of the idea of finance, which makes it just a whole lot simpler. but I've seen a lot of cases when people would switch their degrees, which is totally fine as well. In fact, I was trying to get into criminology during my master's, so I would definitely want to try something else as well, just for fun. But as a bachelor's, I pretty much knew what I wanted to do.
No, yeah, it was same for me. I was pretty sure I will do computer programming, and for the university time, I was sure that my idea was that I'll spend these 3-4 years trying to understand how computers work on all layers, and that's why, as I mentioned, I did electronic engineering as well. So it's like from physics up to the software, all layers. But I did see many people change their majors in KAIST. Many actually changed in favor of computer science, but I think it's just the times. And it was slightly pre-AI, but companies were hiring again. It was a hot field, and it still is.
Noor, how would you say the founders of the startups in Eurasian community that you've built are different to those in Europe?
I think there are 2 points. One is specific to Eurasia or CIS, ex-USSR. It's like very, very strong technical background. That's one factor. But the second factor is also just for the whole emerging markets. It's just a hunger to do something and perhaps sometimes prove or fix something, because a lot of the things in emerging markets, hence they're emerging, is that they're broken. Like you would have a lot of edtech startups from emerging markets because people are hungry for education, for example. You would have a lot of fintech startups because people need money and they want to transfer money in a more efficient ways. So you would see those patterns generally, but we would, like, how we look at that at Eurasian Hub in London is, again, concentrated talent that happens to be in London, and we try to capture them as early as possible and try to be helpful as much as we can, from very basic things like mentorship, connecting to mentors, doing different events, all the way to investing where we can, and hopefully in the future doing doing investments in a more larger scale.
And how do you pick whom to give the investments to?
That's a good question. We're not doing that on scale, so it's more of a very, very customized approach. A lot of those would come like from personal relationships, just because it's currently at that stage. I think it might be the same case in the future as we scale, but you would look at a lot of things, but probably I think it's more important to know what red flags are and what are the green flags, or like things to look at. But the most important thing so far for us is for a founder team to have like a grit, because things can change, world changes, ideas change, lives change for founders, everything like COVID, etc. But one thing that never stops is like the founders' mentality and idea that they want to fix something or like create something. So that's one thing we would be very, very specific with, because even here in Kazakhstan, for example, I would see some startups from really cool universities, and one thing that I would see is that great idea, great market they're addressing, great approach, product, everything is great. However, the person would be at the 3rd year of university, and then they have the 4th year to finish. And when I ask questions like, "What are you doing next?" they say, "I'm thinking of masters." That's like a red flag, because we don't want super educated people who like finish top universities. If they have a great idea at that moment, we want them to be obsessed with it. They need to be dropping out and doing that with their whole heart and life.
A very good promotion.
That's probably one of the things we look at, and so far we believe that's the case. But again, just like the world, investors also change. So. And
how successful are your like choices in whom to invest in? Would you say you have a good eye in like detecting people who lie to you or who don't?
It's a very tricky question, because I guess that's part of the job when you're talking to traders who are also a bit sneaky sometimes. But my first like angel investment happened when I was still working like a few years ago. So there was like a company just like Robinhood, like a trading app in the UK. and they were just emerging. There were like two of them. They would do different community events with pizza. I would go there just for pizza. But
We all do.
They would be like super small team. Now I believe they're a unicorn now. Like probably valuation is like 900 million or something like that. And they were the reason why Robinhood didn't enter until this point to the UK. So, but was it because I had a good eye, or because I just happened to like the sector and happened to meet them? It's really hard. You have to always look at it sort of in hindsight and then see in retrospective. So for now, I'm just doing it with heart and hopefully mind.
Well, yeah. Well, you have to believe in something, and then if it works, then maybe that means that you have a good eye.
Yeah, I think investors generally and have this problem of making themselves believe that they make decisions, but sometimes a lot of it is luck.
How would you say working culture differs in different countries? You've all worked in like very different places.
That's a good question. I think one thing. So in Korea, I'm not too aware of the stereotypical Korean culture where they work very hard to please their bosses and then they do whatever their boss tells them. Because for my case, one was, as I mentioned, by a very young founder who studies in this English-speaking university. The other one was run by somebody who has lived in the US for 20 years, so he's not very Korean in the ways he manages teams. But certainly, people in Korea work very hard. In the US, people also associate their lives with work. So, like, if you go to a pub outside in the evening, especially in San Francisco, of course, people talk about work a lot, and that's something that's very different about the US from both Kazakhstan, Korea, and Europe. And there are many memes online about how Europe is very, very relaxed in a sense compared to them, because for people in Europe, work is just part of their life, not most of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, I guess, in Kazakhstan is it's also part of our culture is that here at work, I guess it's very sort of individualistic in a sense. Like if somebody does something that's not necessarily part of their day-to-day job, it's appreciated a lot if they do it well, and the other way around. Like if they fail, it's also like about that person, not about, I guess, the system, the mechanisms. Which is just different. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just very different in Kazakhstan. But yeah, Europe, it was definitely very relaxed. So I spent almost 2 years in a big company in Bristol and London in the UK. And it was very different from the teams in the US. Like, I was very much surprised how the people in the US would say, I'm out of the office for 40 minutes because I need to do X, Y, Z, and they actually like write emails about that for everyone. In the UK, nobody cared. It was much more relaxed. I'm not sure if it was specific to our teams, but it felt like general trend. It felt like people in the US are much more serious about their work and much more obsessed in a sense with their work. Yeah.
Well, compared to Kazakhstan, like I don't think you can write to your boss like I will be off for 40 minutes because I need to do something. That's
I guess. Generally, yes, but I think since it's a tech company, it's also more or less regarded okay here in some tech companies. As long as you do your
Fair
work
enough.
on time and just leave for 30 minutes to really do something, that's fine.
What would you pick in between those choices of countries?
That's a very good question. Currently, I am actually trying to move back to the UK, and I think it's just a better place to live in overall, I think it's a good place to work too if you're not very, very like there are people who just love their work, and for them it might not be a very good environment in the UK or in Europe generally. But for me personally, I think Europe is. I just like it more.
In the past, how did you guys navigate switching jobs or moving between countries and cities? Do you think it was an easy process, or did you find it hard to adapt?
For me, it was relatively easy, but I think it was just because I moved from one very much English-speaking environment to an English-speaking country, and again to an English-speaking country. So language barrier was not a thing. And also, I think like as you grow, as you learn to live, do very basic stuff like because when you live alone, there's a lot of stuff to do about your home, like paperwork and also some work with the house. As you learn that, you grow, and it gets much easier generally to move between countries. I guess probably the hardest thing still to this day is visas. Immigration questions are still the hardest. Everything else is pretty much straightforward. And again, as I mentioned, communities, Kazakhstan communities, people outside Kazakhstan or people outside their home countries tend to help each other much more, and they're very, very helpful.
Yeah, I would agree about the visa situation, because when I was changing jobs between London Stock Exchange and the US investment fund, I was so scared to change it, because I remember thinking about it as that's a great opportunity to kind of go out and be on the kind of other side. It's just a different thing. While you can also apply your knowledge, but then I remember I had to resign first to apply for visa, and I was like, what if something goes wrong in the visa process? Like a lawyer puts a different letter just because he or she are like busy that moment. So which just shows how much stress the visa brings. But beyond visa, I think what's also important is just to know why you're changing it, why you're going there. There are two. Well, that's one approach, and then another approach is just to take it easy and accept whatever comes your way. So I think for me it was more of a very, very structured approach. I knew, even when I was doing the whole startup thing, I knew why I'm doing it. I knew why I should leave my kind of classic finance job, because I still think of what I'm doing now as still a finance. It's just slightly more fun and creative finance. But yeah, it's always understanding why you are doing it, and what are the kind of pros and cons.
And in terms of visas, what would be your biggest piece of advice?
It's I guess for me, it was just getting a visa. It's a very different situation, at least in the UK now. The reason why I applied like 300 jobs is because I didn't have any other option. Now graduates can get 2 years of visa without even working or finding a job. So it's slightly different situation. But then still, if you're getting a visa or like wanting to get a visa, there are ways you can do it through startups or be a talent in arts or research space. But also trying to understand, why do you need a visa? I think that's even more critical question, is like, is the purpose just to get to the country to get a visa? If that's the purpose, I think you should rethink that, because again, all your actions have to have some value for yourself, and it might be in other country where you're more useful.
Can you say you had any like mistakes or regrets since your visa application process, or maybe generally the job changing, the universities you got in?
For me, probably not. I think back when I was applying to university in high school, it was a bit of a because pretty much everyone else in our batch in Haileybury got into their top choice schools, or at least like top 2 or so. For me, I didn't get into any schools in the US or the UK. UK I actually got offers, but I couldn't go there because of my financial situation. So it was a bit of a like. At the moment I thought this was bad, but now in retrospect, I think it went all good. I learned probably, like, it's difficult to compare, but I probably learned much more by going to Korea. And Korea is an amazing place to live in. Probably not your entire life for specific reasons, but it's still amazing. And other than that, not really, no. I think most of the things played very well for me so far.
I think I can actually link it to one of the questions you asked, I think, about jobs, I believe. I think sometimes not getting a job or not getting a visa, or kind of one of those leading to another sometimes might be a blessing. Because at our time, people were so fixated to stay in the UK just to stay. And they wouldn't have a purpose again. And they would be like, okay, what do I do now? But on the other side, if you get a visa or a job, sometimes you're kind of forced to take that. Because when it's so hard to achieve something, you then can't reject it that easily. And that's sometimes a problem, because what if the other way of like not getting a visa, not getting a job? Yeah, it binds you too much, and then maybe you can do much better on the other side. So that's why when I was, even though I was applying to whatever hundreds of applications, I still knew that if I don't get a visa, I'll just, or I don't get a job, I'll just go and try to create a job. I think that's like mentality that everyone should go with. That job is not the final kind of thing, unless you're a doctor. Of course, you have to.
Or a lawyer.
Yeah, now you still can create a job being a lawyer. Probably you still need to practice, but yeah. And the whole idea is that job is not the final thing. If you have creativity, or if you're an expert in something. Now with technology, you can do so many things to at least feed yourself, and then also to be helpful in some or other way.
This sounds pretty like an independent way of thinking, though a lot of people are like afraid when they're looking into their futures, when they're imagining about the universities they get in, or maybe the jobs they're going to apply. Again, the same people you were with, I'm pretty sure majority of them were like afraid about getting out of the UK. Can you say there was something you were afraid of, but it turned out not to be that scary?
Or
maybe generally something you were afraid of before when you were younger?
I was afraid of physics. I think...
I'm majoring in physics, by the way.
Yeah, so probably my biggest regret, and one of the only ones, is choosing physics for A-levels. That's it in my whole history of studying and working. That's like very, very specific to that. But generally, I don't think I was scared of anything. You would have you would have adrenaline, but because I was from the kind of sports background, you can clearly identify when you're scared and when it's adrenaline. So I think that helped me a lot.
For me, was I scared of anything that much? Well, I was a bit afraid before going to Korea about I guess the language barrier and everything, mm-hmm. But it just turned out to be fine because again, KAIST was very good at supporting international students and creating communities for them, and then it's all up to you. So out of my batch of Kazakhstan students, I was probably considered to explore Korean culture in Korea much more than the others. I still think I did that too little, but it's just about open-mindedness. If you approach things with curiosity, generally, it just isn't as scary as it seems before.
I think I was researching one of your LinkedIns and I saw a lot of volunteering experiences. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
I don't think I have any in my LinkedIn, so it's probably you.
I'm just older, so I had time to fill those in. Yeah, I think it's great to volunteer, right? Because I actually figured that out very recently. So I started kind of involvement in that startup space much earlier than I thought, because I was volunteering for young British entrepreneurs competition, where you would go around and help different school students with their projects and be a mentor or a judge in some cases, which is very, very, it's not as serious as it sounds, but it tops up your kind of memory and idea and perception of things, and probably maybe there is some part that kind of helped me to be where I am now by doing that volunteering. But also I think, especially for finance, when you're sitting and trading millions and talking to people in suits, it's very important to kind of go into real world outside of like numbers and computer, and talk to people and try to understand what the other problems apart from inflation and interest rates are. So that was very important for me, because I didn't want to get stuck in that world where everything is so like dinners,
not to be in
city.
the bubble.
Yeah, exactly. You're in bubble, and I think that's one of the like talking about scary. That's the scariest thing. Scariest thing is to be in a bubble, because you wouldn't even know you're in one. And I think trying to get out of it and go out and volunteer in many different places is probably super useful. And also,
how would you find the places to volunteer in? Would you be invited?
No, I think well, for example, one thing I was doing, which was more of a fun as well. So when there was a COVID, I just created my own volunteering like a page.
Oh wow!
So there was a COVID, and I was in the UK, and you would go. It's like in winter, it's super cold. It's potentially colder than in Kazakhstan, because it's
like
much
colder than Astana, cold or colder than?
Well, yeah, maybe Astana level type, but it's very humid. But one thing you don't see in Astana compared to UK is homeless people on the streets. Not to tell that there is no problems there, but in the UK there are a lot of homeless people on the streets, and I remember I would walk past and would just think, wow, they're so cold, and how can I help? And well, you have to create an attention to do a fundraising, right? So I used to run every day when Boris Johnson declared the lockdown. I thought, okay, if there is a lockdown, then there is less people that give money to those homeless people. So means homeless people get just less money for food, warm clothes, etc. So I thought, okay, from the day of the lockdown, I would run every day until the lockdown stops, and every day I would run in a like in the figures of the numbers of that day. So like in day 1 I would just run one straight line, day 2 I would run in a number 2, and then I think it went into like 27 days. But that was fun, because that was a good fundraising kind of attention. And also London Stock Exchange also matched the donation from other people. That was like fun experience, but also helping those. And it's to the point that you can get those volunteering experiences online. You can find them. There are a lot of them, but also you can create one.
And how did you balance volunteering with work commitments?
I don't know. It's just it doesn't take much time. I don't want to even go to saying that you balance it, because there isn't much to balance. It's you always have time. You can find some time for it.
So you were raising money by taking the money from participants of that?
No. You would because someone just looks at it and says, okay, it's funny, I can give you £10, and if you can find 100 people or 50 people who can do that.
I mean, you were like streaming it on Instagram.
Yeah. I would post it every day on like Strava and other like running apps.
Right. Are you guys married, by the way?
I'm single.
I'm not.
How do you balance the work and life, or work-life balance? How does it work in UK?
I don't know. I don't look at it as a balance. I think it's.
I mean, is it a thing even? Because like in US, it definitely is like rather an imbalance.
And to be honest, it's also if you have a partner who you're not married to, I think, or a friend, just a friend. It's just part of life. I don't think you even have to look at it as a balance. It's not that you now have to take out the time from your calendar, etc. It just should happen very naturally. So yeah, it's hard for me to explain, because there isn't like a structured way into balancing that.
Now for me, I think nowadays I'm definitely much busier than I used to be, especially for the last half a year at Amazon, where I was working both for the startup and Amazon, and now as a founder of an early stage startup, you actually work much more than an average person, but you still get time. Like I still get time to see my friends, to I guess do anything personal life. So I think it's just again about the mindset. In YC there are many startups that are like, when you talk to founders, they grind, and this is sometimes it gets unhealthy. like they sleep less, they just work all the time. It just gets unhealthy. And I personally think you shouldn't do that. I think, of course, you need to work a lot, but just find time. It also depends on, I guess, the personality. And for me, it's just important to do something else but work.
What were your parents' opinions on you going to study abroad or to work abroad? And are you planning on coming back to Kazakhstan?
So for me, when I went to study abroad, I think everyone was proud and happy. I don't think anyone was against it. My grandma, for example, was really happy that it's not like the US or something, because she, for some reason, thought that Korea is very safe. And that is actually very true. Korea is amazingly safe. It's just hard to believe.
Your grandma had an intuition?
Sort of, yeah, I don't know. And then for working abroad, I think also my parents supported me. Am I thinking of coming back? Probably not anytime soon, but also right now at this point, it doesn't depend on me, right? Like long term, I think yes, but there are just different things for now. Certainly, while I'm working on Laminar, there's no point. Maybe except for saving some runway money because it's generally probably outside Almaty cheaper to live in Kazakhstan than in the UK. Almaty is already getting to that level. But yeah, that would be the only reason for me to come back right now. So for now, not, but in the longer term, probably.
I think I'm already kind of in between UK and Kazakhstan in terms of connecting tech ecosystems. So I think I kind of haven't left if I'm talking about now. In terms of parents, I think they like, for example, if you would ask them, they probably still wouldn't know the exact degree I studied. So it's very, very different approach. I always had the luck and kind of privilege of choosing myself. I mean, they never kind of told me anything. They never hinted on any degrees. They still don't know what I do at job. They just recently found out about me resigning from my job. Not from
supportive.
me. So it's a very different, like very independent approach that they have. Yeah.
But I guess to any parents that are thinking of not letting their children go abroad now, I'd strongly advise to actually let their children go and study abroad if they have an opportunity, because I think it actually really broadens the mindset by a lot. And I saw the contrast very much, I think, obviously exaggerated in Korea, because Korea is a very closed culturally country, and you could very clearly see if a person had some experience abroad. And there are quite a few people in Korea who went to study for a semester somewhere, even in high school, or at least went to travel every summer. And you can very clearly see if a person is much more open-minded and, like, I guess, broad-minded compared to people who stayed in Korea that's very, very close and isolated all the time. And I think it's clearly helpful. Of course, there are different reasons, there are different commitments, and there could be something that actually really stops people from going abroad. But if everything's fine and there is an opportunity, don't be afraid and let your children go abroad to study or work.
What could you say about the policy of like US, London, and Korea, maybe other places, towards foreigners, towards people who come to study, to work, and maybe what's the cultural differences in between the attitude towards you?
Honestly, I think it's actually quite similar everywhere. And speaking of Kazakhstan community, in all three countries that we mentioned, there is a very clear separation for two communities: people who do so-called low-skilled jobs and people who actually like studied there and or came to do official jobs. And these things are very different immigration-wise, perception-wise. But overall, I think things are very similar. So generally, on paper, everyone welcomes highly educated labor. But it depends. Like some of these countries, Korea, that could be probably a separate rant from me about what they do with immigration. I think the only difference is that Korea is, again, I wouldn't say xenophobic, but some of the people, especially older generations, are a bit more closed, more reserved to foreigners. But overall, it's pretty much similar everywhere. And the U.S. probably also stands out a bit because U.S. it's sometimes called the country of immigrants. Nobody is American in the U.S. So it's there. You can feel it that everyone's welcome to whatever they want, and nobody is different just because they came from another country. But overall, it's, as I said, not too many differences.
Yeah, I can agree. I can add about the UK. Well, the prime minister until recently was an immigrant. Well, not the kind of local ethnicity. The mayor is different. So yeah, UK is super open on paper as well. In terms of the policies, again, they try to become more open with all those visas for talent, and I think they have this graduate visa, which is well, or some high potential visa, where if you finish top 30 or top 20 universities in the world, you can come to the UK, which is, you don't have that everywhere, I think. Like, you can't finish Cambridge and come to the US very, very easily just because there is a separate route there. So yeah, UK is trying to be more open, but it's, again, it's open for high talent, for something that brings impact to the economy. So the openness is very rational, and when you come to that, it's pretty much everywhere, as Timar said.
You mentioned that it's like on paper. How about like factually? What's the attitude maybe of people?
I think it's kind of distributed in normally through all of those. Like you mentioned, there is some older generation, and I think it's not a problem of the country. It's just a problem of generation. That the generation is the one that was born before globalization, and the way they see things is very different. It's just the same reasons why Brexit happened, the same reasons why Trump was elected back in 2016, and probably some more stuff in Korea. We're just going through that generational shift when you have a lot of young people, but voting power is still within the old generation. But that will probably change in the next couple of iterations of any elections.
When I said on paper, I actually was at that point thinking of what Korea does to all these illegal immigrants from Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan primarily. So they work at these different jobs, ranging from working at factories to collecting seaweed for food. And the problem, like what I personally don't understand, is that this workforce is actually very, very beneficial to Korea. But they are trying, politicians, like in any democratic state, are trying to satisfy the needs of some of these groups that Nur mentioned that are probably more restricted, more closed. And in trying to do so, they are actually hurting not only the immigrants, but also their economy. And they're restricting many freedoms and rights for these people. But instead, they could very much legalize those foreigners, and it would have been much better for Korea. That's the thing that's very different on paper and de facto. But I guess things are changing towards the better in Korea for sure now.
And generally, how significant do you think the cultural differences were when moving between countries, and I think like getting out of high school and just beginning your university journey?
For me, I guess cultural difference was one of the primary reasons I decided not to stay in Korea, because I just didn't feel welcome, but I didn't feel like I will integrate at any point because I'm just culturally very different. Whereas Western culture is something that we're probably very much familiar with, at least because of the movies and everything. And it was just easier to get integrated. So I think these things are very important, but again, don't be too afraid. Go and expose yourself and try, because I think Korea was invaluable experience for me. Of course, longer term, when you choose where to live, where to stay, it's probably one of the most important things.
I agree with the point. I think because we all kind of watch movies or any TV series. Probably more about the US, but UK has its own kind of slight differences. But I think if you're going abroad, I don't think you should be worried about cultural differences because they will be there. And you just have to be open to change, both of yourself or the destination if you don't like it. So yeah, I think just trying to be adaptable and trying to understand why you're going to that country and what is the main purpose.
But you do adapt. Like I certainly think that I have changed culturally a lot throughout the years I studied. Bright examples is that like I actually now follow all the rules very strictly where I could break them for no reason, because in Korea everyone follows the rules. And when I observed the system where like if everyone follows the rules actually work, this was so surprising to me. And now I am much better at that.
This is something I discovered when I came to Haileybury.
Yeah, that's true. It's always hardest for me to answer these questions because I'm very uncultured. So when I'm asked about movies and books, I'm like I'm lost. So maybe if you could start.
I'm uncultured, but I can comment. I'm very boring in terms of books. I don't read much of them, but when I read like economic history, because I just try to understand. It's just super interesting, like how finance evolved and was different, like in 40s, 60s, 80s, the Great Depression in 20s and 30s, and then how it is now. So I just like that kind of stuff. In terms of movies, also a bit boring. There is this movie called, I think, Swapping Places. It's like by one of the key actors there is Eddie Murphy, and I think the movie is like super old, probably like 20th century, like 99, 98, maybe 2001, but it's about stock exchange and finance, etc. So it was one of the movies I watched like when I was at school. So yeah, that just left an impression. Yeah.
What do you think of The Big Short?
It's fine. I think it does. I think it's good for its time. It has it all. Why someone would want to go to finance? Not from the movie, like the how it's made, but I think the things they included there is just spot on.
And what would be your biggest piece of advice to current high schoolers who are beginning to apply to universities?
So for me, it's probably just don't be too afraid. There are things that will seem scary, but you always will, if with persistence and courage, as cliched as this sounds, but you will actually pass through all the challenge. And I think also try and follow what you feel more fit to, I guess, what you actually like and what you feel towards, be it the country, be it the major, and especially like if you're lucky enough to apply to the US or I guess more US-like schools, choose the university that is actually fitting you culturally, because this is a very big thing in the US when applying, and the application, the other side, they also feel that, and this is the way they select students.
I think that's what I at least notice, is that every year, like, generation starts to think about more steps ahead of the time. Like, probably at my age, we would think about university, like, just, and then the slightly younger generation would think, like, okay, what job do I get, etc., etc. I think it's just thinking what you like now and just focusing on your passion at that moment, because don't overthink, don't think 2-3 steps ahead, because again, world is changing so fast. You might change a lot too in the time. You're basically thinking of many variables that are changing and interdependent on that one and like preceding choice. So I think it's just the best bet is to focus on what you like now. You just have the highest chance of satisfaction by doing that. And also the highest chance of result, and then you can navigate. And probably to add to that is just be fluid in terms of pivoting to anything else. And then those if you get those two things nailed, then everything will be okay.
All right. Thank you very much for coming today and sharing your personal experiences.
Thanks for hosting. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll hope to see you soon, more maybe on another of our podcasts.